Hello everyone, welcome back to This Is Why We Stand on Westchester Talk Radio. I'm your host, Joe Archino, and we are so honored to be here once again doing our first show of 2020 at the Family Services of Westchester Center for All Ages. We are, of course, produced by Shark Creative and made possible by Energy Indian Point Energy Center, Hightower Westchester, White Plains Hospital, Westchester County Office of Economic Development, Robeson, and Accorda Therapeutics. It wouldn't be a show without Tom Giorgi, our guru. Tom, we've got to come up with a name for your segment because you are the face, I would like to think, of this program.
Well, I just hope that people aren't getting sick of me and bored of seeing me.
I don't think so, Tom.
All right. If you say so, I'll take your word for it. Joe.
And thank you too for the shirt. I mean, what a way to kick off the new year too with that. I mean, that is just absolutely terrific.
I thought it was appropriate. I don't kneel. Goes right along with This Is Why We Stand. So I said, I got to give this to Joe.
And it's got the Army colors too, which is even better, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, man, what a way. We had Dr. Richard Robitaille on the first segment, and I was looking over at you when we were talking because it really hit home about what we talk about so much, Tom, is we've delved so much into the unacceptable criticism and just lack of respect you and so many Vietnam vets got when you came home. And he talked about, when people like him came home, how the Vietnam vets were the ones who were waiting for them, how he was raised by Vietnam vets. And, Tom, to me, that's one of the things you always said, if it never happens to anyone else, it will have been worth it. And it's what makes the Vietnam vet so special.
Well, we did what we were asked to do. People followed orders and did, like I've told you many times, the options were not, ideal. Who wanted to, I didn't want to go to Canada. I didn't want to go to jail, and I wasn't going to go to the draft board in a dress, so, and everybody else that got orders to go, we went, we followed orders, and we did our job, and that's what you have to do. So, the country never realized that, and like I've told you so many times before, you don't blame the war on the warrior.
No.
You got a problem with the war, you get in touch with your politician and break their chops. You don't do it to the soldier after he served in combat and came home, because there's so many sayings that came out of that war, and I tell it to people all the time, those that have seen war never stop seeing it. That's one. Another one is, when I die, I'll go to heaven because I've spent my time in hell. And then there's another one, that those that lost their life in Vietnam didn't die there, and those that were in Vietnam, some never left. And that's me. I'm still in Vietnam. And like I just told you, I just lost a good friend, close friend of mine, who died of Agent Orange related, and he got killed in Vietnam, essentially. That's the way I look at it, and I think that anybody that dies from, Agent Orange years later should at least be awarded the Purple Heart, because in a way their body was wounded in combat, just in a long roundabout way, for them to, have them take their life. But the Vietnam vet got treated, really poorly, and in my humble opinion, we're still getting treated poorly by so many, especially the ones from my generation. That's what I can't get over. I get thanked a lot for my service, but it's most of the time, it's from people much younger than myself. The people that are in my age group, they see me, I always have this on, I've got something like this on almost every day of my life. So it's not hard to tell, who I am or what I did. And you can't spend 15 seconds to just say thank you for your service. And they say, well, we're, the Vietnam vet, we're, trying to correct all the wrongs that were done to them. Well, we still have a long way to go. That's the way I look at it.
Absolutely.
I hope it gets better and better.
I do too. It does really crush your heart. Even though there are times though when you do get down, there are other times where you can't help but feel so grateful. Especially, we had Randy Jurgensen on one of the programs, Korean War veteran, and he was so touched by meeting you, hearing your story, that he took out an ad in the paper talking about how the country owes so much to the Vietnam veteran. And that's a guy who fought in a war where our Korean War veterans also, they didn't get criticized the way our Vietnam vets did, but the Korean War is called the Forgotten
War. That's
and
correct.
Those guys
absolutely.
did so much and fought a really, really bad enemy in a very difficult war, and they did not get the respect and the proper proper remembrance they deserve too. So I think that speaks volumes, and that's one of those things I always hold on to. But Tom, I'm sorry, you.
The Korean War vet and the Vietnam vet have a lot in common
Yes.
as far as that is concerned, because, like you said, it's the forgotten war, and that was a horrible, horrible war.
It
I mean,
was.
I dealt with heat and humidity, the entire time I was there. But the Korean War vet, they not only dealt with heat and humidity, they also dealt with freezing cold conditions. And that was a tough war, a tough enemy. Red China and North Koreans, and they had a very hard way to go, and they didn't get the respect and adulation that that they should have. And I've said this many times before: you don't let an army march off to war and not allow them to march home again. The Korean War vet essentially never marched home like the Vietnam vet.
You know what, Tom, I think it's kind of a perfect way to segue into what you brought us today. You had brought us that great picture to kind of tie in with our last segment last time about being deployed away. My dad still loves that story where you talked about the Spam and the pineapple on Easter. I mean, it's the little details like that that really bring the experience home to people, and really, it's what history is all about. You brought history alive for so many people, and for today, you did that for us too, bringing home some of the letters. Now, you've talked about some of the letters that you wrote back and forth between home, but tell us about some of the ones you got recently, and just what it was like to see those again.
Well, like I told you, my cousin Jeff, whose father was a Korean War vet, he was an MP on the 38th parallel, and we were very close. He was the big brother I never had, and he showed me so much. He taught me how to shoot, and we did so many things together. We used to build models, and when I went and spent time with him, because they were always shipping me out for a weekend, because I was the first male born into an all-girl Italian family, so everybody wanted me for the weekend when I was a young boy. So I spent a lot of time with him, and I was very, 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 very close to him. When his young son Jeff, who was 8 years old at the time when I was in Vietnam, when he gave me those letters Christmas Eve, and I sat at his dining room table reading them, I had tears in my eyes, because I remember writing those letters. I remember the words, as I was trying to describe to them what I was going through. And what I would do is I would tell them, my cousin John, nickname was Ding, and my cousin Dolores, I would tell them, really what was going on. When I wrote to my parents, I always extracted things. I didn't tell them, what was going on. So, and John told me that. He said, Tommy, he says, you want to vent, you do it in my letters. Don't do it to mom and dad, because, my mother was under a doctor's care for 3 months, and I don't know if I told you this, but when when I was wounded, and they were trying to notify the family back home, every place I went, from battalion aid, you want us to notify your family, and I told you this before. No, don't do that. My mother does not need a telegram or an army car pulling up in front of the house. I'll write a letter. But when I was going home, I found out in the Philippines, and I told them, all right, now get the Red Cross in, please. And I said, you can notify my family. When they notified the Red Cross in Portchester, they knew, they had heard, how sick my mother was under a doctor's care. They said, how are we going to go about this? They notified my family doctor. He called my sister, and my sister broke the news to my parents. So any letters home to mom and dad, I'm doing great, it's not that bad, I was lying through my teeth, but I couldn't tell them, we did this yesterday, we made contact, this guy got wounded. I couldn't tell them that, it just would have made her crazier. So, but that's what they were there. John was good in that regard, because I got to tell him. I said, boy, oh boy, yesterday was really rough, and like that letter I showed you, I told him I hadn't taken a bath and a shower in 31 days. I didn't want my parents hearing that. My mother would have gone nuts, man. You kidding me? So anyway, they served a good purpose, and I'm glad that they were there to receive those letters and write back to me. Keep your chin up, hang in there. Before you know it, your tour will be over. It ended sooner than I thought it was, because I got wounded so badly, and was sent home, and when we do that thing on Christmas morning, every year I think of how close I came to being one of the names on that monument in Portchester, because I was the first one from Portchester to be really, really badly wounded. There were three guys that went before me, Johnny Polino and Charlie Windish, who were Marines. Johnny didn't get wounded. I think Charlie got some shrapnel wounds to his ear. Don Verastro, who was a Remington Raider, he was behind the lines, was a typist. But when I went and got wounded, I was wounded so bad, and when the reports started filtering back home and the word got out, there were people that had me killed in action. That's the rumor that was going around. And one girl who I had dated called a mutual friend, and she says, "Bobby, did you hear Tommy was killed in Vietnam?" She says, "No, he wasn't. He wasn't. That's not true. He was wounded. He's on his way home. We don't know how badly he's hurt, but he's going to be home soon." So it was a tough time, and I'm just glad it worked out the way it did.
Oh, I mean, because especially like you say, Tom, I mean, that just, for someone who hasn't been in a situation like that, you can't even imagine when all your friends and family members, they don't know what happened to you, and just to have that weighing on you constantly. I mean, it's one of the reasons why, again, we should never take what we have for granted.
True.
Because it's just to have, for you not to have to live for that is because someone else did, and you're a perfect example of that. But back to kind of the letter writing for a minute, it is such a powerful piece of history when you look at all the wars throughout our nation's history, letters back and forth and home. For you, when you're what was a day like for letter writing? Would you just, whenever you got a moment, because I'm sure for you, you're on patrols all the time. Like you said, you haven't gotten a chance to wash or clean for 31 days.
Right.
So I'm sure finding the time wasn't always easy.
Yeah, most of the time when I told my parents this, I said, "Listen, I'm going to write whenever I get the opportunity to," and my entire family, I told them that, and my friends, I said, "I'll do my best, but you got to understand what I'm going through." So it was usually when we wound up in a fairly secure location where we were going to be for a couple of days, that's when I took the time out to sit down and write a few letters home. And it's different now. Today, there's satellite phones and emails, and the soldier of today is able to stay in contact with his loved ones. Back then, when I wrote letters home, sometimes they would hold our mail up for weeks because we were constantly on the move. And he said, "We can't send packages out to them. What are they going to do with them? They can't carry." Sometimes I would get 3 or 4 packages at a time, and that's the one where the pineapple was in. Things like that. So you can't be carrying this stuff around when you're lugging ammunition and basic survival equipment. So I would sometimes not get mail for weeks, and then I would get into a location and I would get 6 or 7 letters and 2 or 3 packages. And that was always a godsend. And my parents would send me sticks of pepperoni and hard Italian cheese, and I had a big buck knife and I used to slice it with that. And I remember one location we were in, and my position on the perimeter was not far from where the pay was being handed out, and it was payday, and everybody was filing past me while I was eating, and they were going, "What do you got there?" I said, it's called pepperoni. You want to try a piece? I was with mostly Southerners. Like, "Yeah, I'll try some of that pepperoni." So, they had me saying y'all and yonder and taters, because when you're around them, you pick up their way of speaking. And so I would, and I would just slice, and everybody was just, "Hey, what's that?" And they were coming by, and I was saying, "Here, take a piece of pepperoni and cheese, enjoy." And they loved it. But packages were a godsend, and that's what kept you going. And it was great getting them, but writing home was tough. You just couldn't sit down and say, "Stop shooting, I ought to write a letter here." So it was hard. It was different than contact today. Much different.
I think I have a new favorite story though, Tom. Picturing you out there in the field eating pepperoni and cheese from New York. That's not stuff I think is probably easy to get out in the fields in Vietnam, I'm sure. But one of my other favorite things is so many of the photos that you've shared with us. In my documentary, which you're one of the feature veterans in, I have so many of those great photos from the albums you showed me. And one of my favorite ones is, I think you're in a trench, you've got your shotgun, you've got your shirt off because I'm sure it's summer, it's hot. When you look at those pictures, can you like think back, when that was taken? Does it just kind of almost you relive it?
Yeah, I could see those pictures, and I could remember the location we were in when that picture was taken and that foxhole was dug. And that particular picture you were talking about, I was with my close friend Paul Solis, who was from Brooklyn. And you always migrated towards people that were from your area. Everybody on my gun crew, the machine gunner was from Arkansas, the assistant gunner was from Missouri, Groves was from Texas, and Solis was from Brooklyn, and I was from Westchester County, Portchester. So Paul and I kind of like partnered up. And we were close. He's in that picture with me in the foxhole, and I had just gotten a package which contained a Playboy magazine, and I think there was a picture of us, ogling a centerfold picture that we posed for that. That was done, purposely. But I could look at each location, and I could think back and remember, we made contact the next day, and so-and-so got hurt, and 14 of the guys got wounded by punji stakes, which were planted in the elephant grass as we were, moving forward. And I could look at those pictures, and it takes me back. It takes me back to where we were and what we were doing at that point in time. Yeah, it's pretty moving. Now, I want to just drift off subject a little bit. I saw 1917 last night, and if you haven't seen it, go see it, because first of all, it's World War I, completely different. It's all trench warfare, and it's a British unit, but all combat is pretty much the same when you boil it down. It's miserable conditions, and boy, it really depicts it in that movie. And I saw it in Dolby Sound, and boy, when those explosions were going off, and the theater was shaking, it took me back to when the artillery rounds, landed in our vicinity, like on July 3rd, and the trees. I remember telling you that the tops of the trees were crashing around me, and I thought that I was going to get crushed to death by a falling tree. And you could feel the ground shake. It's just amazing what explosives do and the force and impact that they have. And it is depicted so well in 1917. I rank it right up there with Saving Private Ryan and Patton.
That good, wow.
And those are World War II movies. Yeah. Like I said, this is World War I, which was a totally different type of warfare. Just miles and miles and miles of these elaborate trenches that both the enemy and the Americans had, and they fought out of these trenches. They would attack out of the trenches, retreat back to the trenches, and it's a pretty amazing movie. It's very, very, very well done. So
it's funny. It's my plan this weekend to see it, and now that I've got your endorsement for it, and I've heard nothing but rave reviews for it so far. And one of the things you and I have talked about doing is kind of a comparison with the Vietnam experience to the Vietnam War movies. Whether it's We Were Soldiers, Platoon. There's a lot of very famous Vietnam War movies out there. But of course, for you actually lived through the war. You actually were in combat. Much different, I'm sure. But what's your take, when with all these very popular Vietnam War movies compared to the actual experience of being there?
Oh, like I might have mentioned this before, but there's three really good ones. Hamburger Hill is good. Platoon is good. That was the 25th Division, my unit, but it was in Cu Chi. I was in the Ia Drang Valley with the 3rd Brigade, which was an isolated task force, and that's where We Were Soldiers was filmed. And that was the first major confrontation with the North Vietnamese that Hal Moore had with the 1st Cav. And I think that's the best because it's in the exact same area that 9 months later I was wounded in, fighting the same enemy that they did, which was the 66 MVA Regiment, which was all but wiped out by Moore's troops, and 9 months later, they were back at full strength. This is how fast they got themselves back together. They were a very, very determined enemy, especially the North Vietnamese Army. Viet Cong were good guerrilla, militia soldiers, whatever you want to call them. Everybody thinks they were a bunch of kids running around in black pajamas. They were good. And the NVA, I have the highest respect for them. They're, I think, the 3rd largest army in the world. They were highly trained, highly motivated, well supplied, and they were fighting, in their backyard. So they were a tough enemy. And, my unit, like I said, on July 3rd, we made contact with them. And I was lucky enough to be one of the 7 that made it out alive. Sergeant Moore died that night in surgery. Booker McCoy died 3 days later on July 7th back at Brooke Army Medical Center. So I'm lucky. I'm one of the 5 that lived.
Well, we thank God that you're here with us today, Tommy.
So am I.
Every time we get to talk to you is a treasure. We always learn so much, and I think we're going to see you again always, because you're always such an important part of the show. But thank you again, as always, Tom. 2020, we hope it's going to be a super year for you. We got a lot of big plans coming up, so you're going to be a big part of all of them. So as always, thank you, Tom.
Happy New Year to everyone on the show. Happy New Year to everybody, especially my fellow veterans. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Tom.